Hello and welcome everyone to this session on building and sustaining data communities. We have three stellar panelists joining me in this discussion today. We have Sofia from personaldata.io. We have Glenn from Hushline, as well as Tamanda from Roots and Rigour. And my name is Viivi. As mentioned, I'm from MyData, and I will be your host for this panel. And to kick things off and to provide some context for this discussion on data communities that we're about to have, let's start with a round of introductions, because I'm especially interested in how each one of us is positioned regarding data communities, because this is affected by where in the world we are, what type of organizations we work for, and what we take data communities to be in the first place. So I'd like to ask all of us here on stage to introduce ourselves by answering three questions. Who and where are we? What do our organizations do? And what data community means to us? Okay. And I'll throw the ball first to Sofia. Would you like to get us started? And let's put the mic on as well.
Yes. Hello. I'm very excited to be here, and all of the talks were really great and inspiring. So I'm Sofia Kypraiou. I'm a data scientist and researcher, and I have been working with association in Switzerland and the University of Neuchâtel. So I have a background in data science and computer science. And with personal data, I work on the design of the data collectives and creating all of the tools and the data analysis they would need in order to help the collectives realize their goals. So with personal data, we are a public interest NGO based in Geneva, Switzerland, that helps civil society to advocate for individual access to their own data. So we help individuals and communities to recover their personal data. And then we create projects around data which are with the concerned and organized community. We help to develop new data governance models and conduct studies for algorithmic auditing and compliance of the data access rights. So we help when we provide legal support along with technical and data analysis expertise. And this is my part. And we conduct participatory research to produce new insights that will serve the community. So we empower and we provide expertise, but in the end, it's the community who decides what to do with that. And our approach is using data protection rights as the means of individuals and communities to take control of their data, have proofs, and decide together what they would do as a new or as an alternative for their community. So we have two main projects. In Paris, we work with Uber drivers to help recover their data. We analyzed it, created the data pipelines and tools, and then studied their working conditions. And now we're in the process of governance, of how to use this data to improve their business model and working conditions. And the other project is with ACMU and Kauna that was on the first panel. So we work with content moderators, with the African Content Moderators Union to create a database for the international companies that outsource work to Kenya and then contribute to the exercise of data access rights and analysis and establishing a report based on their personal data. So for the last questions, for us and for me, data community is forms when people unite around their shared data to achieve a common goal and they have a common purpose. So it's when communities realize and when people realize that their individual challenges are shared. And this is what both projects try to do. It's how we can have our data rights and that can transform individual struggles into collective action.
Thank you so much. That is so much to kind of dig deeper into. I'm really glad to have you with us today. Next up, Glenn, would you please introduce yourself, your organizations, and your approach to data communities?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks, Viivi. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Glenn. I am the Executive Director of Science and Design, a new 501c3 nonprofit in the United States. And we build free and open source software, helping with free speech and free access to information online. Our main product that we've recently launched with the help of the Data Empowerment Fund, thank you guys so much, is Hushline. And it's a new whistleblowing management system. It's part encrypted messenger and part network of people who can help whistleblowers succeed, whether you're an organization or an individual. And for me, what a data community means, so whistleblowing is a cross-industry problem, right? So the data community for the workplace are employees. The data community for schools might be students and sometimes teachers. And for journalists, it's the public. So one of the things that we're trying to do is ask, how do we get more people to take on the risk of whistleblowing, and how do we, on the software maker side, make it as safe as possible for them and guide them towards the path of greatest success? And each industry is going to have its own challenges. And the whole value proposition of Hushline is start with a plan. Don't go into information disclosure emotionally or reactively. But rather you can start with the Hushline network, find a lawyer, a journalist, maybe a mental health professional, and you can start your journey towards the path of greatest success.
That's incredibly interesting and important work. So thank you so much for joining us today as well. And next, Tamanda, please, over to you.
Thanks, Viivi. Yeah, also great to be here. Thank you very much for the invite. So I'm Tamanda, as you've heard. I'm joining from Leeds, the north of England, a very cold Leeds today. And I'm a trained sociologist and qualitative social researcher. So much of my background involves being very heavily embedded within communities. I'm an ethnographic researcher. So most of that involves, being involved in communities who are trying to address a particular cause. I'm here today representing Roots and Rigour, which is an organisation I have founded and I'm the co-director of. And it's been a direct response really to what we're calling data communities that have emerged out of attempts to challenge systemic racism primarily. The main projects I've worked on have been about addressing systemic racism. And we, as an organisation, we're based up in Leeds, but we work across England, across a range of causes, and we use lived experience storytelling as a way of interpreting and making sense of data that either we collect and gather in groups around a particular social cause, or larger scale data sets that the government may collect, but maybe interpret in very different ways to our communities on the particular issues that we've addressed. So the issues are really, really varied. I've worked on everything from policing, stop and search, policing mental health impacts within Black communities, looking at issues of Black maternal health, and the fact that Black women continue to be more likely to die during childbirth in the UK, based on the health system's own data. All sorts of things, looking at chemical harms in hair products. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those in more detail, but I guess the main thing to say about data communities and how I personally understand them, very similar to what others have said, it's communities that coalesce and gather around a common concern, cause, or issue, usually with a desire and a sense of purpose to tackle and drive change through that issue. And often like with a very clear sense of historic or current injustice that's happening within that space. That's meaning a particular issue is either being overlooked or intentionally ignored in some cases, unfortunately. And that's those communities really often have a strong sense of agency around a sense of wanting to own their own narrative and their own approach to data collection and interpretation. So that's me.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today as well. And I'll complete the round of intros by sharing a little bit more about myself. So as mentioned, I'm Viivi, and I'm with MyData Global. We're an international nonprofit headquartered here in Helsinki, in very slushy Helsinki, where I am sitting right now. And our organization is focused on empowering people as individuals, as also as groups and communities with data about themselves or data that impacts them and their lives. So we're a nonprofit association. We're a membership-based association. This is where kind of the action really happens within the kind of MyData movement. The nonprofit association is a facilitator of a community that can be also called a data community, of course. And I'm a philosopher by training, so I really like kind of analytic and precise definitions of things. So for me, a data community is, first of all, it's a community. The data part there is a descriptor of something of what it's at the core, and for something to be a community, for me, it seems to require some level of identification with it. So people need to actively or in some way identify as being part of this group, as this set of people. And because I've said in some other occasions before, I don't think it's enough for me to download an app on my phone and be, told I am now part of the community of this app users. I don't think that's quite what we're talking about here when we're talking about data communities. But it's something stronger, like it was pointed out earlier as well. There's a sense of purpose. I really like the point about motivation from kind of a past injustice or present injustice, or the concern for a future one as well, right? And what makes data communities as opposed to other kinds of communities is that these are communities that are either the subject of data collection, I would call that a data community, or an agent of data collection, people who and communities who actively kind of try to plug some of these data gaps that were mentioned earlier on as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in the world of data communities. So we have a couple of questions that we'd like to touch on with you, and the first one is the philosopher's favorite question, which is why? Why do we need data communities? What are the conditions for their need and their emergence? So would you, Tamanda, maybe like to start and kick us off on this, your reflections on why do we need data communities?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think probably a lot of this has been discussed in some of the previous panels, which is that there are certain groups which have been historically marginalized or on the fringes of data and knowledge initiatives. And I think that's a common theme with all of the initiatives that I've personally been involved with. There's a known problem. It may be stated and acknowledged by the system, but rarely are the people who are most directly affected by the issue or have lived experience of that issue invited into either determining what data is collected, how that data is kind of stored and kept, and who owns it and who has the power really to tell stories about the data that exists about them and their experience. So, one of the larger projects I've worked with, for example, was something on stop and search. And we often used to have this conversation about police powers to stop and search people and when those result in actual criminal arrests and so on. And very often we had stops happening that had no further action emerged from the stop. And so you had communities telling a very different story about what stop and search policies and police powers did to the system, which justified the need for these policies to exist, but those stories weren't coalescing or coming together, or there weren't opportunities for communities to really be in dialogue with systems about which aspects of that policy is working, and if the policy is needed at all, and if there might be better ways forward. So I think that why is it's really about sharing power, sharing agency, and really pushing for equity, working with the system where we can to get that, when and where that's possible. And some people don't think that's possible, but we have to, some people do want to start there, and that's how and why we need those kinds of initiatives from my point of view.
That's really valuable, and I love the concrete examples that you're sharing there as well. What about Glenn? What comes to your mind when you hear Tamanda and think about, reflect on why we need these communities?
Yeah, I mean, why we need these communities. Without these communities, in a lot of cases, we wouldn't have the information that we need to take action, right? So I also serve on the board of advisors for Distributed Denial of Secrets, which is a 501c3 that publishes hacked and leaked data that serves the public interest. And between the mission there and our mission, I've said this before, and it's a little US centric, but I think it's publicly traded company centric. The business of business is just to continue to grow, right? And when an executive, a C-level person gets hired, they have a goal, they have something that they are there to achieve, and it's typically not making the workplace happier, healthier, more successful in their eyes. It's about driving the bottom line, and a lot of times to get to the bottom line, corners are cut, ethics are wavy, and this can cause a really, really big issue. In fact, since 2000 in the United States, the SEC has recovered over $43 billion in penalties from companies. Now, there's also a case of fear of retaliation. That is the main driver, I think, across communities as to why they don't speak up. So in the workplace, more than half of us, 60%, will witness or experience workplace harassment or discrimination, but only about 30% of those 60% will ever make a formal written complaint. And then of those, 1 in 400 will ever find some successful legal resolution. And without people speaking up, we wouldn't know a lot of the things that we deserve to know. I mean, think about John Barnett, the late whistleblower from Boeing, the Boeing case. He spoke up, under great threat and enormous retaliation to expose public health and safety concerns, because a company was trying to drive profits, continue shipping their goods, and instead of thinking, oh, should we stop production because of safety concerns, or should we just keep going and silence the people that are raising those concerns? And that is almost always the case. So if it weren't for these communities, there would just be a lot more that's unknown in the world, in terms of corruption, in terms of abuse, ethics, legality. And it really, it is whistleblowers that kind of continue to make progress in the case of holding companies, institutions, people in power accountable.
No, that really resonates. And so the phrase that comes to mind is that knowledge is power, and all of this community work really tends to revolve around notions of power in one way or another. So I'm wondering, Sophia, from your point of view, I really liked in your intro when you talked about individual rights kind of being the mechanism through which to fight collective fights, to paraphrase you a little bit. So would you elaborate a little bit more on why you feel that these data communities are, why we need them?
Yes, so I agree with all of the previous panelists, and it's about power and about shifting of power, trying to fight back. So we are all creating data. We are the one, and from all the people that talked before, they're the ones actually generating the data that feed the algorithms. And oftentimes we find ourselves powerless over these working conditions. So this is where the communities come, where people that face common challenges with platforms and algorithms. And it all starts with a pressing issue of discrimination, of unfairness, of unsafe working conditions, and then can, through the community, can evolve into a broader question of data governance and worker power. So I can explain more about the two specific use case that we worked with. So, for example, in Paris, when we started, drivers were individual when they were looking at their own earnings and their expenses. They were all facing the problems of algorithmic management, but they were trying alone or trying through WhatsApp groups and through smaller individuals to understand how the algorithm worked or how they're being affected. So when we started coming together more, it also helped identify who are the other people who are having the same issues. And by bringing data together can help uncover some systemic wages issues and some problematic patterns in how the algorithms are being used. So from this insight can help also for the cooperation, for the cooperative, and on how the drivers can use their combined data to create better scheduling systems for them and more transparent models. Similarly, with what's happening now with the African Content Moderator Union, we're seeing how the pressing issue, as Kawana said before, was also to make this invisible work visible. So all of these challenges, the low pay, the confidential contracts that silence them, and the lack of training, all of this psychological stress, they need to be known. So we're working together to come together as a community to gather proof of their working conditions to legitimize their occupation that has been hidden from public views. And it's important to have this, it's important that we are doing this as a community. And the importance of the community is the flexibility to serve different needs. So what works in one case doesn't work in another case. But what works is that it helps to give a stronger voice in policy and decision-making processes that affect their lives. And they emerge from the community-specific needs and challenges.
I really appreciate the examples and the kind of concreteness that they bring to these discussions. Sometimes when we discuss power and communities and data, these all seem to be quite abstract and intangible even kind of concepts. So it's really helpful, I think, for my thinking at least, to ground these discussions in practice. I wanted to move on to another question, which is related to the fact that each one of us works for or represents an organization that supports different kinds of communities. And so the question that I kind of want to touch on is first of all, like, how do you see the relationship between an organization like the one that you work for and the community? Like, what is the role of the organization vis-a-vis the community? Are there different modes of engaging? And who should kind of keep these organizations afloat? Where's the kind of sustainability and funding specifically coming from, or where should it be coming from for the organizations that engage with different kinds of data communities? So maybe I'll go to Glenn first. Would you reflect on those questions?
So where funding and support comes from, you know, and how do we build and sustain these communities? I mean, so I think that as a nonprofit or a open source project or anything becomes gets enough traction and enough public awareness, the chance of their survival is greater. You know, we are fiscal sponsors of one project called Onion Share. It's an amazing peer-to-peer file transfer tool that uses the Tor network. And for the longest time, that was just completely community sustained. I was part of that team. Been working on it for almost a decade. And I think that when there are tools, sometimes they resonate so deeply that people just want to help. Signal, I think, is a good example of that. Internet Archive, I think, is a really good example of that, who also needs our support. And as a product development organization, Science and Design, my career has been in user research and product design. And inherently, that means I need to understand what the problem is before we solve it. And what that means is that we have to be as embedded and connected with the people that use our platform, both on the people who need a tip line side and also on the whistleblower side. So, if we put out something that doesn't resonate with the community, it's not going to get used, or if it's not usable, it's not going to get used. And it's just my personal belief and philosophy that we need to base all of our software decisions based on the needs of the users and the community that we're solving. If you're a big nonprofit, or if you're a big organization, you might be able to sustain, maybe depending on your scale and your outreach, based on donations. We're new, we can't do that just yet. So we, again, so graciously, so amazingly received a grant from the Data Empowerment Fund, and that allowed us to go from a beta prototype of a product to a full production platform that will be around for years, no doubt. And one of the things that I'm very conscious of is, when we started this nonprofit, is the highest order, I think, for me, which is also kind of simplistic if you think about it, I hope, is how do we create a very usable, a product that people love, open source nonprofit product that's going to be around, that can sustain on its own. So part of this grant, we wanted to think about, and just in general for the nonprofit, how do we think about our business model that doesn't just rely on grants or donors? And me coming from big tech in my career, I'm thinking Hushline can serve a business need that can help to drive our financial stability. So I think that, which is also, I think, prescient because of what's happening in the United States right now with our government turnover and what potentially could happen to nonprofits in this country, and the turmoil that the nonprofit industry was in last time that this administration took office. So we need a balanced model to seek out funding, and right now we're trying to think about software as a service, platform as a service, as well as hardware, and then grants and donations as well as relying on volunteer contributions. There's been a lot of amazing contributors from the linguistic side, just UI text localization, engineering, research, just so many things that have raised their hand to say, hey, we see the value of this tool, we want to help. And I'm so thankful for that. And it's really largely the mutual aid part of it is why we were able to go from nothing to a beta prototype, and then from beta prototype to where we are now with the help of the Data Empowerment Fund.
That's really interesting. So what I'm kind of thinking right now is that the funding needs to come from diverse sources, and then funding, also resourcing. So the fact that people are putting in their time and effort is also something that's a resource that is being provided that helps sustain the community. And it does resonate with me that to be resilient, it is good to diversify where your resources are coming from. But what about Sofia, from your point of view, from personaldata.io point of view, you work directly with these different kinds of communities. How do you perceive your relationship with the community, and who should, give you resources? Who should do that?
So in regard to our relation with the community, our role is more supportive. So we would provide the technical expertise, the legal support, the analysis, and the research. But then with all of the insights that we get, it's in the end the community who decides what to do with all of this information. And what we are also trying, what we also aim and we want to do is to create an alternative. So what we are trying to build, it's trying to build a new alternative of how communities will use their data. So what we're trying to do now with Uber drivers is to create a new data governance model that would also be transformed into a new financial model, so that the community can be independent and then self-sustained. So there we're exploring different options of how to create this cooperative and the different funding models. However, there's still this challenge of initial capital for the infrastructure development and the technical support. And for the content moderators, that would be having them better and fairer working conditions. So the idea is that these communities become independent. And so I would also like to thank the Data Empowerment Fund that was very important to help start this project. And then it would be very, as you said before, have diversify the incomes and diversify where we receive the funding from.
I'm glad to hear that that resonates as well. What about you, Tamanda? What is on top of your mind when you reflect on these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the role in terms of Roots and Rigour and the support we've provided to data communities and collectives of people, it's really been about respecting the agency of those communities and what their desires are for research and data, but also really offering, I guess, some sense of capacity building and really humanizing a conversation about data. We have a tendency to talk about it as if it's this really kind of abstract, thing. And I think for most communities, we're all dealing with data every day. It's about human stories can be gathered together to build up a data set and to help people make sense of and meaning of the way they engage with data on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, I see our role very much as walking alongside, serving the community, being very responsive and flexible to questions that arise in relation to data and research as they go about doing work that they were already doing. It's not us manufacturing this community and then coming in, parachuting into a space. It's recognizing valuable work that people are already doing and saying, how can we support you? Because we align with your values, we align with your mission. And like it or not, the way that the world works with power, if you come along with a qualification, sometimes you can lend a bit of credibility to a cause and have it taken more seriously than it might otherwise be taken. In terms of sustaining that work, it's honestly been a really significant challenge for us. We were very, very fortunate in that a lot of my early work in this area came through my research at an organization called Black Thrive Global. We got 10 years worth of funding. We had never been in that situation as Black organizations. I should say, we thought we had 10 years of funding. In fact, we had 10 years with a small asterisk that said, you have 3 years and then your funding will be reviewed. Unfortunately, I'm not sure entirely what the reasons were, but that funding did not get renewed after 3 years, even though I believe, and many people believe, we were doing excellent work. And so as a result, we sort of fell off a cliff edge, and much of the work that I'm doing now has occurred on a voluntary basis, myself included, work, for example, with Black women in challenging the maternal health system in Birmingham. Lots of us have been volunteers pulling together, trying to get our work and our reports launched and out into the world. And in terms of sustaining it, we really do need to look at kind of longer term funding, because it changed fundamentally the way we approached the problem and allowed us to think much bigger than when we were doing 1 and 3 year projects, where you sort of fall off a cliff edge as a community and it's hard to sustain kind of the hope that you build up. As a last point, because I know we're short on time, I think we are exploring all kinds of ways of being self-sustaining. We'd love to work with the health system, for example, in Birmingham, to look at maternal health, and we'd like to be commissioned and do co-production with them. But I have to say that I am cautious about what it means to do co-production meaningfully. I think funding and flows of money need to go directly to community organizations, or maybe smaller research organizations based in the community that can be agile and nimble, rather than through more traditional large institutions where there are very difficult and complex power dynamics that sometimes inhibit and undermine that work. So it's a work in progress. We're stitching together funding as we go all the time, and hoping that, having established Roots and Rigour, we can find ways to make the work more sustainable and give communities the kinds of knowledge and expertise that they need to push their agendas forward.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that kind of background and information about the different kinds of situations that we as kind of community facilitators and supporter organizations often face and share. But I believe that we've had a Q&A function running for this session, and we have some questions also from the audience. So Emma, are you able to share some?
Absolutely. Thank you, Vivi, and thank you to your panel. Jo's actually with me. She's been looking at the questions coming in and some that we crowdsourced previously. So Jo, over to you.
Great, thanks Emma. Vivi, I hope it's okay, but if I can give you the questions and you can choose who in the panel you'd like to answer, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so the first question is, we've seen how generative AI has disrupted the technology landscape over the past 2 years. How can we prepare communities to adapt to and thrive alongside new developments in the future?
Well, that's an excellent question, and very much the topical one that's on everyone's brain, I'm sure. Maybe it's something that Sofia, you might want to touch on, especially when with respect to the work around algorithms in general that you've done with the Uber drivers.
Yes, and I think that also should come back to what we heard in the beginning of the panels about the humans and all of the labor that is being done behind these issues. So yes, generative AI is there, but let's not forget who created it, who was there to edit, to make sure that it works right for everyone, that is more fair now, or it's working towards that way. And let's not forget all of these people that Kauna said that said before, that she was there, she was the one that was flagging content, that she was reporting to the FBI if cases were too violent. So it's like in all of these technological revolution, just don't forget that it's humans who are making it, and they're still humans in every part of the chain.
That's an excellent point, well made.
Can I give you another question?
Yes, please.
Great, okay, so how can people watching this event who are involved with data empowerment in some way or another support these initiatives and these communities to become sustainable right now?
That's also another excellent question. I think I'll throw this to Glenn. What would you say?
How to be more sustainable? You can give money. I mean, money. You know, I hate to have it go there, but good people are expensive, and that's just true. You know, when Like we have a lot of volunteers that want to help, and it's from all levels of skill, from entry level people hoping to learn something to principal architect level that can hit the ground running, and you don't have to manage or do anything. And those people tend to be really, really expensive, and those are the people that you tend to want because they have the experience of how to build secure, stable, idiomatic software. So if you are someone who has a proficiency that you're passionate about, especially, that can overlap with some of these missions, and it's even for software, you don't have to be an engineer to help with software. You could be an artist, you could be a writer, you could be really anything to help push our progress forward. So I think that anyone that can help ought to think if it's the right thing for them. When I was in big tech, I did pro bono work for all these organizations, Signal and Share, Calyx OS, because I was more passionate about human rights software than I was enterprise business software, believe it or not. And I just think that we need more people that are willing to say, I'll do it for free, because nonprofits really need it. And in lieu of that, if there's foundations that can give, if there's a benevolent billionaire listening out there, start giving out your money. Nonprofits need money to survive, and it's not just paying people. We might be able to find all of the qualified people that we need to run a nonprofit for free. Let's just hypothesize that. What about server costs? What about all of the other things that we need, just the business related things, just to keep a business moving forward? So if you're in a position to give to, especially anyone on this panel, any nonprofit that resonates with who you are, especially now when things are uncertain for civil society, I think that would be a very meaningful contribution.
That's fantastic. So money, time, skills, all of these are valuable things for the data communities that we work to support, and our organizations, and many like them outside as well. Would there be one more question, maybe?
We want time for one more question, Viivi.
Great. Okay, so the final question is, what have been some of the key factors in the sustainability of your initiatives?
Tamanda, I think this is coming to you.
Yeah, I mean, this one is, on one hand, an easy one. It's just been the commitment and the spirit of people who want to address a cause. And I think we have to be so cautious about not taking advantage of that, under-resourcing it, not extracting too much, because this will reinforce some of the historic challenges that we've seen, particularly with marginalized communities in this space. I also think huge successes in the work that I've been involved with more recently, especially because it's required a lot of voluntary effort from myself and certain colleagues, have been infrastructure plus organizations that have been really doing important work to build communities of data communities, for one, like communities of communities, if you see what I mean. So one in particular, Connected by Data, I had the really good fortune of working with over the last 6 to 12 months or so, with a group called Maternity Engagement Action and a group of mums called the Maternity Ambassadors for Change. And what they did, they had funding. I mean, again, it was short term, but it was a brilliant chance for us to spend 6 months working with a bunch of other people who saw themselves as campaigners, but were really helped to understand how all of their campaigns were really rooted in data, and to think carefully about how you use that data to advocate for change with the system. So being part of that network of actors was extremely helpful to us strengthening and launching our campaign, which was called See Me, Hear Me, to get Black mothers heard and their perspectives integrated into thinking about health systems. Another organisation, Place Matters, also doing really good support work and knowledge exchange and generation about using data within particular localities and places in the UK, to drive systemic change and to bring together multi-stakeholder groups. So, I mean, of course, Roots and Rigour would love to get some funding to continue its support. I think I'm speaking like everyone here, but I know there are other brilliant organisations that are doing that sort of really important knowledge exchange and stitching together. And I hope those sorts of groups and organisations receive more support and funding to keep that kind of work going on.
100%. And what really resonates with me about this is specifically the kind of avoiding extracting too much from those who really, really care, and avoiding, you know, burning people out for their as a thank you for all they do, you know. But with that, I think we are at time. So it is my great pleasure to thank you, Sofia, Glenn, Tamanda. Thank you to everyone who joined us. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and congratulations to everyone behind this great event today. So thank you, and back to you, Emma.